The iPhone 13 Pro Max is finally here, and just like last year, there is no charging brick in the box. You get a cable, some pamphlets, a single sticker, and the phone, and that's it. I managed to get my hands on the Sierra blue color variant of the device. The blue this year doesn't quite stand out as much as last year's Pacific blue, where the color truly popped. And even though it looks more like gray than blue, I actually prefer the more subtle aesthetic. The frame is still super glossy stainless steel, which I still don't quite understand, since the aluminum frames on the standard 13s are not only lighter, but come in a matte finish, which not only looks and feels better, but prevents fingerprint smudges. The good news is that the glass backplate is still a fingerprint-free matte finish, but the camera module is now absolutely enormous. It's not quite as big as the Mi 11 Ultra or Vivo X70 Pro Plus's camera bump, but it protrudes by an insane amount. However, those cameras are one of the few upgrades the new iPhone has, and take slightly brighter ultra-wide pics, more detailed main photos, a further zoomed telephoto camera at 3 times instead of last year's 2.5 times optical zoom. The max digital zoom this time round is now 15 times instead of last year's 12 times. And yes, we still have LiDAR for great portrait shots. We now have something called cinematic video, which is pretty much bokeh or portrait video we've seen on plenty Android phones for a while now. And yes, just like those Android devices, it too is capped at 1080p resolution and 30 frames per second. Of course, regular video recording can go up to 4K 60 FPS, and just like all iPhones before it, records better video than any other smartphone on the planet. The selfie camera has remained the same, but still takes some of the best pictures around, and the 4K 60 FPS selfie video recording option is once again class leading, which also now supports cinematic video. Of course, that selfie sensor sits in Apple's signature notch, which is now 20% smaller, but unfortunately is still part of the package. And as much as I'd like Apple to ditch the notch, I can't help but feel that the notch is one of those things that makes an iPhone an iPhone. Inside that notch is of course a 3D face unlock sensor, which works great but still requires a swipe up after use, and there is still a lack of a fingerprint sensor. Unfortunately, Apple haven't utilized the extra space next to the notch for things such as a battery percentage icon, but the new iPhones do ship with iOS 15, which isn't quite the upgrade we wanted, but there are a few noteworthy features such as focus do not disturb profiles, scheduled notification summaries, scanning live text from photos, group tabs in Safari, as well as some added security and extra privacy features, all of which are available on last year's 12 Pro Max once you update it to the latest iOS 15. Powering all of these tasks is Apple's new A15 Bionic chipset, which increases performance thanks to a higher 3.23 GHz core clock speed and beefed up Apple GPU, now offering 5-core graphics instead of last year's 4. The results of AnTuTu version 9, Geekbench version 5, and 3D Mark Wildlife showcase this quite well, but you really don't notice much of a difference in average day-to-day tasks. What has also improved this year are the battery capacities, which has the 13 Pro Max sitting at a whopping 4,373 mAh over last year's 3,687 mAh battery in the 12 Pro Max. The 12 Pro Max always hits over 9 hours of screen on time in my detailed battery drain test, so I'm extremely excited to test out the latest iPhone. The bad news is that Apple have kept the charging speed the same, which means that in theory, the 13 Pro Max will take longer to charge than its predecessor due to the larger battery size. That larger battery cell is needed though, because while the display has remained largely the same, Apple have finally introduced a 120Hz refresh rate, which they like to call ProMotion. You would think that rocking a 120Hz refresh rate panel is extremely battery taxing, hence the increased battery capacity, but Apple have included low temperature polycrystalline oxide technology, also known as LTPO, in their Pro displays this time round, which allows for dynamic refresh rates between 10 and 120 Hz, which theoretically makes the new Pro models even more battery efficient. The higher refresh rate isn't exactly noticeable when looking at it here, and doesn't yet support 120 FPS animations like on the iPad Pros, but the feel of scrolling and gaming is worlds apart when comparing it to last year's 60Hz iPhone 12 Pro Max. You are seeing and feeling twice as many frames on your screen, which is honestly the absolute best thing about the new iPhone 13 Pro models. Unfortunately, this new 120Hz ProMotion display is not available in the cheaper iPhone 13 and 13 minis, which leads me to say that upgrading from a 12 or 12 mini isn't exactly worth it. But it is certainly a massive upgrade if you are planning to get a 13 Pro or Pro Max for this feature alone. I would even go as far as to say that Android users finally have a reason to purchase a new iPhone. This is TechNick, and I'll catch you in the next one.